Hi everyone, my name is Ismat Adams. I'm a land use scientist here at Cape Nature. Myself and my colleague Philippa Huntley will be presenting on biodiversity mainstreaming as part of this 2023 Conservation Review. The Convention on Biological Diversity defines mainstreaming biodiversity as the process of ensuring that biodiversity and ecological services are appropriately and adequately factored into policies and practices that rely on biodiversity and that impact biodiversity. And this then requires that at the local level, state parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity integrate the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity into sectoral plans, processes, and policies. To incorporate biodiversity issues into sector policies, raise awareness and understanding, and ultimately improve outcomes for biodiversity, mainstreaming requires committed partnerships with state and private sector stakeholders underpinned by effective communication and capacity building. Partnerships and effective stakeholder engagement allow mainstreaming products to be developed that can inform various sector policies and decision-making processes, as well as biodiversity-related legislation. Then, in terms of the biodiversity-related products that are being mainstreamed, the Western Cape Biodiversity Act of 2021 mandates Cape Nature to produce a biodiversity spatial plan, protected area expansion strategy, and to report on the state of conservation and the state of biodiversity as well. Or BSP identifies priorities in the Western Cape that need to be safeguarded to ensure the continued existence of functioning ecosystems, ecological processes, ecological services, and species populations within those areas. The biodiversity areas are known as critical biodiversity areas, or CBAs, and ecological support areas, or ESAs. And yeah, so the current 2017 BSP is in the process of being updated. And then the Western Cape Protected Area Expansion Strategy aligns to the National Protected Area Expansion Strategy and aims to ensure that biologically diverse land is kept safe from inappropriate development and that biodiversity targets are met. The Western Cape Protected Area Expansion Strategy also aims to expand the protected area network in the Western Cape so that it encompasses more representative areas of biodiversity and ecological infrastructure, and then in so doing also meets the province-specific ecological requirements in terms of provincial biodiversity thresholds. And then the Western Cape Biodiversity Spatial Plan spatially guides the Western Cape Protected Area Expansion Strategy regarding priority biodiversity areas that require action. And then the Western Cape State of Conservation Report is a relatively new report produced by Cape Nature on an annual basis, wherein Cape Nature provides annual updates to the conservation status of species and ecosystems, and highlights outcomes in response to the global biodiversity concerns in the context of its mandate. And then the annual State of Conservation reports feed into the more comprehensive State of Biodiversity report, which is produced every 5 years. Then, as part of biodiversity mainstreaming, the mainstreaming products are made available to the public on national and provincial platforms such as the BSP, which is included in the online GIS platform Cape Farm Mapper, and the Sanby Biodiversity GIS platform, or BGIS. And then we also have capacity building and workshops which are conducted regarding mainstreaming products and other aspects of biodiversity related land use as and when required. And then Cape Nature also provides policy advice or inputs into new legislation and legislation amendments to ensure that the legislation is aligned with the objectives of the biodiversity priority areas as per the BSP. And then in so doing, we ensure that the BSP priority areas are reflected in the current policy and legislation, and that the conservation objectives are being upheld. which then further supports the safeguarding of these priority areas as it's embedded into legislation. And an example of this is the newly assented Western Cape Biodiversity Act that requires the biodiversity spatial plan to be used to inform land use spatial planning and decision making, policies, guidelines and environmental instruments, and also to inform the decisions and actions by any organ of state whose policies and decisions have an impact on biodiversity in the province. Cape Nature also reviews municipal spatial development frameworks to ensure that development plans for municipalities are aligned with the biodiversity spatial plan, as well as any other biodiversity related concerns, plans or policies that have been developed for the municipality. And then finally, Cape Nature also provides input into the development process by commenting on environmental impact assessments. Coming to Cape Nature's biodiversity mainstreaming regarding development in the Western Cape, Cape Nature is a commenting authority on development applications within the Western Cape, which means that Cape Nature is not a final decision maker in development application outcomes, but our input must be considered when making a decision, because as per the Western Cape Biodiversity Act, Cape Nature is responsible for the conservation of biodiversity in the Western Cape. And also the primary cause of biodiversity loss in the province is the loss and degradation of habitat through land use change such as infrastructure development and agricultural activity. So during Cape Nature's commenting on development applications, Cape Nature needs to ensure that development requirements and biodiversity requirements are balanced. An important consideration for Cape Nature when reviewing these applications is that biodiversity can be irreversibly damaged or destroyed and ecological resources may run out. And from an ecological perspective, maintaining biodiversity means maintaining all the components of ecosystems to ensure resilient ecosystems that provide long-term ecological services. This means that ecological infrastructure underpinning the habitats, flora and fauna, and the interactions or processes need to be maintained. So there is legislation that regulates certain development activities for which an application must be submitted for development. The legislation most frequently linked to applications Cape Nature is required to comment on are the National Environmental Management Act, or NEMA, which provides the overarching principles and procedures for environmental management that applies to the activities of all people and organs of state in South Africa, where those activities may have a significant impact on the environment. And then NEMA also gives effect to Section 24 of the Constitution, which indicates that everyone has a right to an environment that's not harmful to health and well-being, and to an environment that is protected for all. And then another important piece of legislation from which the applications emanate is from the Environmental Impact Assessment, or EIA, regulations, which regulate certain development activities which would require environmental authorization before the development or the activity can commence. Which an example of this is construction near to a watercourse. And the EIA regulations are also linked to the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, or NEMBA, list of threatened ecosystems, where certain development activities in listed threatened ecosystems require environmental authorization. And the EIA regulations also include activities such as prospecting and mining under the auspice of the MPRDA and the One Environmental System. And then in addition to commenting on applications that come out of that result from the EIA regulation triggers, there are also other aspects of a development proposal that Cape Nature will need to provide input on, such as biodiversity offset proposals and rehabilitation plans. So under the Western Cape Land Use Planning Act, or LUPA, municipalities are required to produce spatial development frameworks, and as per the Western Cape Biodiversity Act, Cape Nature is required to review and comment on the consistency of these spatial development frameworks, taking into consideration the objectives of the Biodiversity Spatial Plan. And then spatial development frameworks guide the overall spatial distribution of current and planned land uses within a geographical area and sets broad-scale zones for certain development or land use activity. And then, yeah, so the image on top is an example of the spatial planning categories within SDF, or Spatial Development Framework. And then municipal zoning scheme bylaws describe how land within the municipality may be developed, the zoning scheme bylaw will usually include a zoning scheme map with different categories and conditions for development, as well as conditions for which development permissions are required from the municipality. Then the image on the bottom is an example of a zoning scheme map, and each land parcel within a particular zone will have certain conditions as to how development on the land may proceed. And then Cape Nature provides comment on the potential biodiversity constraints in municipal planning LUPA applications, where a development proposal triggers the need for submission of an application for municipal approval related to the zonation of the land on which the property is located. So Cape Nature comments on NEMA and LUPA development applications to prevent irreversible impacts in ecologically sensitive areas such as watercourses and riparian zones, as well as on biodiversity priority areas. And then Cape Nature provides input into these development applications regarding the biodiversity constraints on a proposed development or activity, and ensures that the proposed development is aligned with the ecological sustainability principles as per the Western Cape Biodiversity Act and the NEMA environmental management principles. And by commenting, Cape Nature also ensures that the Western Cape Biodiversity Spatial Plan is included in the land use decision-making process, and that best available science regarding biodiversity is being used to inform the development application. So for the year April 2022 to March 2023, Cape Nature submitted 474 EIA comments and 138 municipal land use planning comments, as per the graph at the top right. So, which represents the amount of input by Cape Nature in ensuring that biodiversity is adequately considered in proposed development in the Western Cape.
Hi, my name is Philippa Huntley and I work as Cape Nature's mainstream specialist, and I'd just like to share some information around the mainstreaming work we've done via capacity building in the last year. So to start off with, at the beginning of this year, we had an excellent engagement with SALGA, the South African Local Government Association, who hosted a municipal councillor training which took place in February 2023. Cape Nature gave 3 presentations which focused on compliance and enforcement in relation to biodiversity crime, the Western Cape State of Conservation Report, and the Western Cape Biodiversity Spatial Plan. The purpose of these engagements is to inform biodiversity best practice so that councillors are empowered to assess whether available products such as the Biodiversity Spatial Plan are informing decision-making at local government level. This would include, of course, municipal land use planning. Also in February 2023, Cape Nature participated in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment State of Environment Information Community of Practice. So that's a big annual event. And at this national event, we presented the State of Conservation Report. And it's very good to note the alignment between our provincial reporting and the national reporting formats for state of reports. And this format is shorter reports that are presented on an annual basis and that they're available online. So in terms of municipal capacity building, 2022-23 was a very busy year. Cape Nature provided capacity building to 15 municipalities, both local and district. The local municipalities were Witzenberg, Stellenbosch, Drakensberg, Langeberg, Cape Agulhas, Breda Valley, Swartland, Cederberg, Berg River, Matsikama, Beaufort West and Hessequa. And the district municipalities were Cape Winelands, West Coast and Karoo. And we also gave input to the annual SAMI assessment of all 30 municipalities. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we also, of course, engaged with SALGA and the ward councillors. Awareness raising supports formal mainstreaming, and it's an important component of the work done by Cape Nature. To quote from a World Bank publication on mainstreaming biodiversity and development, for biodiversity mainstreaming to have lasting impact, it must occur at a very local level and become part of ordinary people's lives. So to this end, Cape Nature produces a range of excellent publications, some examples of which are on the screen here. We also engage with a number of stakeholder outreach events and programs, and that really does support raising awareness about biodiversity at a local level. And just to end off with, we'd like to acknowledge the partner organizations with whom we work. Cape Nature greatly values the formal and informal working collaborations we have with numerous partner organizations. The organizations with whom we currently have formal agreements for biodiversity conservation are depicted in the hexagons in the slide. In the last year, specific to mainstreaming, we particularly value the excellent collaboration with local and district municipalities, with the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning, especially the Directorates of Biodiversity and Coastal Management and the Directorate of Development Facilitation, and of course SALGA and SANBI and the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. Thank you very much from myself and my colleague Ishmat for listening to our presentation about biodiversity mainstreaming. We look forward to future engagement around biodiversity mainstreaming.